the Northwest home for paranormal, you're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest, in the shadow of the stratovolcano that stands 14,411 feet, Mount Rainier. Good evening, I'm your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. Tonight, we've taken the show on the road from Buckley, Washington, at Lost Woods Breweries. Make some noise, ladies and gentlemen. We're live on the stream. If you're watching at home, thank you. You can be a part of the show by texting our studio hotline. It's open tonight. Maybe you have an experience that you want to share tonight. Our panelists will get into that in just a moment, but the studio hotline is 775-990-5151. So everyone ever asks me this one question: why is it not a local phone number? Well, those who are big fans of Art Bell, the godfather of paranormal radio, 775 comes out of Pahrump, Nevada. 990 because it's easy, and 5151's for Area 51. All right, here we go. So we've opened up tonight our panelist, Tom Sewid from Sasquatch Island. Make some noise. We have Robert from Raincoast Sasquatch here as well. Make some noise. And our last panelist, Bob spelled backwards, will also be joining us. It's an honor to have all of you guys here this evening to discuss and explore the mysterious world of Sasquatch. For decades, people from all around the world have reported sightings, encounters. This elusive creature speaks, sparking the debates whether it's real or an undiscovered species, or just a folklore. All right, guys, do you think Sasquatch is real? Make some noise if you think it is. Tonight, our panelists will be sharing their experiences, encounters, and this is a unique opportunity to gain a deeper insight to Sasquatch and the ongoing debate surrounding its existence. So let us begin the journey together to search for the truth about Sasquatch. It all begins right here, right now, on U.S. Phenomenon. So let's begin this thing. Let's open up the lines. If you want to be a part of this show, we'll have the text line open here. But let's begin this evening with our roundtable conversation. Guys, how long have you been doing this? Robert, how long have you been doing this?
I first got out into the field with the RCMP as an anthropology student in the 60s, the 1960s. It was a time when the Mounties would be a lot more transparent and discuss the tracks. You'd see, photographs of the track in the Winnipeg Free Press. And so this wasn't something that was really hoaxed. You didn't find kids going out and doing hoaxing a lot, especially on the native reservations that were beside me where I grew up. They were Cree people. There any Canadian natives here, time to say. And I'm happy to share everything that I've got, that I've been given with from Native people with you guys here tonight, as well as what I've studied at the medical school in terms of human anatomy and being a fish and wildlife officer while I worked my way through PT school at the University of Manitoba School of Medicine. So that takes it up back to the 60s.
Thank you. Our other panelists this evening, Tom Sewid, how long have you been doing this?
57 years. I've been an Indian, and my tribe, the Kwakwakiwak, brought me up with them, and the totem poles in the graveyard had big chunachas, Sasquatches carved and scaring me as a small kid. And 2015, Peggy, my wife, introduced me in Kent, Washington, where we lived, to finding Bigfoot. And I said, what's wrong with those bloody white people? They don't know bugger all about Sasquatch. And she said, be a whiny Indian or go on podcasts. So I went into Wes Germer's podcast, Sasquatch Chronicles, and the rest is history. I've been traveling all over Sasquatch Island, North America, doing Sasquatch conventions, talking on different podcasts, doing video casts, and now we're about to do some television shows, a series here, hopefully in the next couple months. But 57 years I've been after them, trying to find them, and I've seen them a few times.
And the Vancouver Sun has documented that, Thomas. You're documented in that, and also in John Green's books. Is that correct? Yeah, the dates way back to the 60s.
And our last panelist at the very end, Bob spelled backwards, has recently been a guest on US Phenomenon. So if you can spell Bob, you can spell it backwards, right, Bob?
Well, my lead in is on the count of on the count of three, everybody say, "Hi, Bob."
Hi, Bob.
And just like on my tour buses, nobody waits 3 seconds. What a prime example of following instruction. And you even said my name backwards. So there you go. There's too many Roberts, too many Bobs. I stand out this way. My belief goes way back to 1966, believe it or not, 1966. And it's because of my neighbor, my woodshop teacher from Queen Anne High School, sharing a story of a sighting up at Indian Flat Campground off 410. And since then, I have been a promoter. I am a uncertified, unregistered Washingtonian all my life, and I am the ambassador for Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, anything out there in the woods, as I just retired November 1st. But my big calling was being out there with all these people from out of state and educating them about our little species in the woods, which, believe it or not, Washington State Fish and Game actually did let Bigfoot be listed as a species. How many of you knew that? So we're getting a little closer to the government recognition out there. But my whole point was to share my sighting with those people. Sometimes the buses would be 56 passenger. They all knew me as Bob spelled backwards. I told them if I ever come across a sighting, they'll all remember that guy because of the headline on the paper. But more importantly, they would share their sightings. They had somebody to talk to. And it was like Al-Anon, and the family is growing out there. And I've got so many people out there that are like you that know something's out there, and we're not going to let people pull it over our eyes. Be conscious out there. You might even see DB. Yeah, buddy.
All right. So again, and we do have an open panelist, and we'll have a mic open in about an hour or so, roughly. And let's start off, guys. I know some of you have been on the radio show and podcast in previous. I mean, Tom, we've gone back since Northwest Phenomenon days. So I want each of you to kind of share your experiences, and we'll start off with Robert to my left here. Robert, you're going to go ahead and start off and share your experience, and then we'll move on down the line.
Well, I don't know. What do you want to hear about? Do you want to hear about my house getting shook, or do you want to hear about
Let's do the house shooken one. Let's
Okay.
start there.
Well, it's not in any of my. Kind of led to a divorce. We'd had a vocalization, a real roar that was 10 seconds long outside the house in Ketchikan, Alaska, back in, it was around 96. So I hadn't had a sighting in Alaska. I'd had a sighting in British Columbia that I describe in detail in this book. But that didn't lead to a divorce. That was, although I nearly lost a girlfriend over that one, but not lost in terms of legal, but in terms of what was throwing pebbles on my tent. But you can read about that or talk with me about that afterwards if you like. They don't like flashlights. And they don't like headlights. In fact, they'll not turn and look at you when you're approaching with a vehicle and you got headlights on. In fact, if they do, it's sometimes like this, and I have multiple eyewitness descriptions of that behavior. In fact, it even reminds me of a native story. It might have been Kwakwaka'wakw about a Tunica or a Bokos. I don't know which one. Maybe Tom can start me out. Where the child was, I don't know. It was something about peeping out between the fingers. Tunica. Okay, you can ask about that later. My native friends and later patients. My dad was a teacher at a native reservation in northern Manitoba. I grew up in Canada and then moved to Alaska later. I moved down here first before I went to Alaska, though. Give me credit. So the vocalizations and the house shaking were a couple of weeks apart. I also heard a roar outside the house. I lived in Old Growth in Ketchikan. I moved there in 92, built a house there in 93. I was 40 when I got married. I'd had one encounter when I was in British Columbia as a physical therapist working in Nanaimo. That's described in this book. I think I was interested in my girlfriend, really. And It saw me when I came out of the tent, and I wasn't expecting to see a Sasquatch. I was expecting to encounter some kid from Campbell River who'd snuck up to where I was camping and had been throwing pebbles on my tent after midnight without leaving tracks on the road. So I was having some cognitive dissonance with all that. But anyway, in Alaska, the vocalization, the roar, lasted almost 10 seconds, and it shook the big window in our upstairs 3rd-story master bedroom so badly that my daughter, who was about 12 at the time, came running upstairs, and she was frightened. So was my ex. But I was married 26 years to a military medical officer, and I served as a physical therapist with the natives in Ketchikan. So not one native group, not just the Tlinkits, but also the Tsimshian and the Haida. And it's the Haida masks that you'll see often in my books. The Haidas have a real interesting approach to this. They're not as colorful as the Canadian Kwakwaka'wakw. They just have one kind of Sasquatch. They don't have two sort of creatures like Tom. Two, like Tom will talk about. Tuniquas and Wokwis are Canadian Kwakwaka'wakw.
So this is a good transition to ask Tom Sewid. Between the two, I know that we've had on the podcast in previous shows, and I go there because I don't want to miss a beat here, but with your experiences, can you share the encounters that you've had out in the bush?
First off, I got to acknowledge the Muckleshoot tribe for allowing me and my wife to be speaking here today. But getting on to that, one of my better FLIR video experiences until Buddy turned the wrong switch and lit a spotlight up was on the Buckley Enum Claw Bridge, walking on this side of the river. That Pinnacle Mountain is my stamping grounds for doing investigations. I've heard vocalizations, I've seen their tracks, I've seen their tree structures, and thanks to the owners of the Lost Woods Brewery for bringing us here, not 10 minutes from where I investigate. I'll be bringing my clients that come investigating with me to have a beverage here, and then we'll head out and go see if we can find a big furry fella. But I lived in the bush from early 1990s. I got stung by the government in Revenue Canada, which is our IRS, and I hated humanity. So I moved into the bush, and I did ecotourism, commercial fishing, sports fishing guide, grizzly bear hunting guide for 24 years about, and living out in bush off grid most of the time. At one time I got told to beep off from a girlfriend, and I went rogue Sasquatch. I went into the bush with cartons of cigarettes and about 10 pounds of coffee, and months later I came out, and I knew what it was like to be a Sasquatch, to hate humans, to loathe us, despise us, and to fear us. And that's what Sasquatches are. They don't want to be around us. But all the encounters I have had, one of the better ones was me on a commercial salmon fish boat that I was a captain of, a seine boat, anchored out in the bay, heard something, smelled something, put a big spotlight on. There was two big ones, one big male, one big female. Once we hit the spotlight, the male dropped on his knee with his arm in front of his face. The female dropped on the beach with her buttocks facing us, with her head down in the fetal position. And we could see their eye reflecting from the female, 2 eyes, 1.5 eye from the male. 25 minutes later, I shut the spotlight off, and we could hear them move into the bush and push a big dead tree down. Hour and a half later, my girlfriend at the time and a crewman are sleeping. Me and the other crewman, we watched that big male walk on the beach from here to the back wall, and we lit him up with a spotlight. That was my first sighting, one of my best experiences. And then years later, when I learned not to fear them, and I was working in bush building cabins for my tribe, we were having our garlic and apples being taken at night, and I said enough's enough. So I hid in a pile of leaves about 6 feet high, and just the coming of dark, this big Sasquatch was walking through the bush looking at my cabin's back walls. And when he stepped off a berm about 5 feet high onto our outhouse trail, I popped out of the leaves and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And that Sasquatch just rah, looked at me, screamed again, jumped on the bank, turned and ran. And I was eyeball to eyeball with the Sasquatch. And it was a juvenile one, probably I'd say a teenager. And then through the years, I've had many other experiences, because to me, they're just like white bears, white deers, white whatever. You spend enough time in the bush, you're going to see a white something. You spend enough time in the bush, you're going to see, smell, or hear a Sasquatch and have the close encounter of the hairy kind. They're out there. Sasquatch Island, Indians call North America Turtle Island because it looks like a turtle from space. I'm not going to get into that. This is a Sasquatch gathering, not UFOlogy. But Turtle Island, I call it Sasquatch Island because every Indian tribe of over 630 tribes in North America have a name and stories and beliefs and perspectives about Sasquatch, which they refer to as the other tribe. And you will always respect them. You'll never harm them. You never think of killing them. So I call North America Sasquatch Island, and I've traveled all around Omaha Indian Reserve with a Fleur Scout 2, watched a pregnant female and a big male, its mate, walking across a field not 80 yards away from me. I've seen Sasquatch in other places of British Columbia. Here, I've seen them off the bridge. And when I was in Louisiana years ago, I heard something, didn't know what it was, but I would find out it was Rougarou, their Sasquatch. So all over Sasquatch Island, we have them. And all we got to do is learn a few tricks. So when you go to Sasquatch Island Facebook group, that's the how to get close manual on how to get close to Sasquatch. As much as I love pistols, we're not allowed them in Canada. But my 12 gauge, I'll break it down, put it in plastic, and put it in a pack sack. I believe you should do the same thing with your pistols. Put them in Ziploc baggies in a belly bag. They're ready to go when you need them, if you need them. But have that smell and visual of a pistol hidden. Otherwise, you'll never get close to a Sasquatch. So hopefully some of you will come share your encounters with me today. Tell me, what you've seen, and I'll share with you characteristics like Sasquatches. When they look at you, they're going to drop, put their hand and arm in front of their face. The Coast Salish tribes from Washington State, the Vancouver Island, and over to Vancouver area call a Sasquatch the Watcher. Now, this will probably tweak to some of you. You're in the bush. You hear a branch shaking. You turn and look, and all you see is a bough bouncing like that. But there's no bird, no raccoon, no cougar cub, no bear cub. What that was a Sasquatch grabbed the branch and pulled it down and looked at you. And it made a judgment call. You're comfortable in the bush as they are. You're a bushwalker, a bush dancer. You're not stumbling and tripping. You don't have mountain equipment and REI clothing with little water bags with straws going to your face.
Come on,
you
that's
look
the best.
like a busher. You're mushroom picking, hiking, hunting, forest, timber cruising. But that bouncing bough, all it was a Sasquatch pulling it down, making judgment, pulling it further, letting it go. And as he turns, the bouncing bough says, I saw you. I respect you. I'm going my direction. You please do the same. And what is a Sasquatch? Years in the bush and seeing them. Yo, weeksas, majos ye jonahwa. Hello, how are you doing? I don't know who you are, Sasquatch, in my Kwakwala language from my tribe. And you will hear, yo, elakasla. Hello, I'm doing all right. So if you want to find your Sasquatch, you go sit with the Muckleshoots down here and other areas where you investigate. You sit with the tribes and you learn their protocols and permissions for investigating Sasquatch. Then in turn, you learn how to say, hello, how are you doing? I come in peace. And when you get close and you hear them, smell them, you might not see them because they're hiding. That's when you speak the language, and you will be surprised what they'll say to you because they are the other tribe. United States has 3 recognized indigenous people, two, Inuit and North American Indians. Canada has 3, Inuit, First Nations, which I am, and the Métis, which you call Cherokee down here, a lot of their tribe. Well, once Sasquatch is conclusively identified, we will have the 3rd recognized indigenous tribe of the United States and the 4th indigenous tribe of Canada. DNA's coming in, they're human. So when the Indians say they are the other tribe, that's what you're looking for. A tall, hair-covered, nocturnal ability with their eyes, stink, another form of human. That's my belief, my opinion, but I've lived decades in the bush, and what I've seen, heard, and from time to time, yo, weeksas, chonacha. Hello, how you doing? And I get an answer. I know that I'm not dealing with a monkey or a Gigantopithecus blackie. I'm dealing with the other tribe.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, how many, by a raise of hands, have ever had an encounter with a Sasquatch? Do we have any? We do have some out here. We do have some out here. That's great. I have not had an encounter. Yeah, right. I have not had an encounter. Let's go to our last panelist, Bob, spelled backwards. Bob, you have a unique approach to this because of what you've done for most of your life, either being in different industries, but collectively becoming almost like in the Catholic Church, most people say the confessional, that this would be, you would be the priest behind the Sasquatch, where people have come to you and shared their stories. What have you heard in all of your travels from around the world? Or
in summary, those that reported sightings to me, in most cases, they don't want to see it again, but they do affirm that they saw what they saw. They don't know what it was. They just know they saw what they saw. And they didn't share the story or sighting because they didn't think that anybody would believe them. They didn't want to be laughed at and made a joke of. And once I shared my sighting with my wife, they felt down to earth with Bob. And it was like a ministry on the church. Now, for an example, I just retired in November. I took on the last assignment with commercial driving. By the way, this is the first winter I'm not chaining a commercial vehicle. I chained my buses to Crystal last year. I can't celebrate more not being on the road with snow. 2 weeks before I left the company that was doing the Columbia River, Lewis and Clark, you see their ads on TV. I actually had a U.S. Marine active duty on my bus with his wife, and we had another couple on the bus, and they had heard my sighting, and he came up to me with his wife and shared a sighting just last year in the snow up in the Sierras, where his platoon was being targeted by several of these creatures throwing boulders at him. And they did have weapons with them. They were not able to shoot at him because of the trees and the vicinity of a local township. They didn't want to create a stir or get attention, but they were scared for their lives. And these are Marines. Marines are the toughest of all our service. And I've handled Navy, Air Force, Merchant Marine on my buses. I will tell you, he was thrilled that I've shared my sighting, and he felt not alone anymore. And he did share with me there's no way he would ever go back to that area. And that, again, echoes through a lot of these people. They do not want to ever encounter, I don't know if it's out of respect or just not knowing what these creatures are capable of. But as Tom says, they are a tribe of their own. They're a people that exist, and they could have been exiled from a different time, whatever. My belief is they're highly intellectual. They know we're out there before we know they're out there. And for these researchers with their trail cams and everything else, I still say you're the ones that are going to see it and be the one to be able to say, I captured it. I'm just saying you all have that right. Nobody's exempt from seeing it. And I've had celebrities, paid athletes, politicians, nobody's exempt. Tell me of their sightings. And for what it's worth, they're still out there and to be found. So go have fun.
now, did you want to respond?
I did want to share something, Bob. Thank you for that. In a nutshell, talking about the U.S. Marines, I was a Canadian Lieutenant, Butterbar 01, married to an 05, a U.S. military officer. And I was in Alaska. There was a war game behind Ketchikan called Northern Edge in 2001. And the Marines from Pendleton had quite a few boots on the ground with live 50 caliber rounds. So we were doing active fire exercises and running 24 hours a day for a period of 3 days. Northern Edge, Canadians were involved, and the National Guard was there in a supervisory capacity or just an observer capacity. And what happened was, and I was a civilian observer at the time, and I popped up and just in time to see a U.S. Marine gunnery sergeant grabbing a lieutenant, a National Guard lieutenant, by the lapels and shaking him and yelling at him, "Who the F do you think you are?" This gunny was 6'3", 240 pounds. Somebody could have gotten fragged. We had live 50 caliber rounds. And the lieutenant said, "What are you talking about, gunny?" I'm listening to this. and nobody got hit. He was just shaking them by the lapels, okay? And he said, you know what I'm talking about last night on the bridge, logging road bridge that his men had been deployed up north of Ketchikan. The men had been crossing a bridge with their live on foot, only 200 yards from where their trucks were deployed at an old clearing. And the trees started shaking. They were screaming and roaring. The men they were so frightened, they dropped their 50 caliber webbing in the creek. And whatever was shaking the alders in the bushes scared them badly enough that they ran after they dropped their webbing and their ammo. And they ran like heck to where their trucks were deployed 200 yards. Can you imagine how the gunnery sergeant felt? Super peed off, right? So he's taking it all out on the National Guard, saying, where'd you get a guy in a ghillie suit? Somebody could have got fragged. He's thinking the National Guard hoaxed this, right? And our Guard guys knew nothing about it, absolutely nothing. And the gunnery sergeant almost got called up before the mast because of it, and it tapered off. But I just wanted to say, those guys were scared. They really were scared. And those are Marines, U.S. Marines, who are used to a lot of action. Let me show you something from Washington State. Thanks, Tom. Can I get your help, Tom? Okay. Upside down? Yep, we're upside down. So how many of you know where Oakville is? Have you ever heard of the Brown thermal image? How many of you heard of the Brown thermal image? Anybody? So 4 years ago, pull out the whole, take this in, Tom, right here. Okay. And we can drop it a bit, Bob. Just drop it down.
It's a.
Thanks. So this is a thermal image, and it's blown up to life size. At this point, and I went out and investigated. BFRO was there. There were all sorts of people out there, and John and Sarah weren't looking for any money. They were concerned about their kids' safety behind the gazebo where the forest comes down. There's a bit of weird stuff going on out there too. I could tell you about that by personal experience. I'm not too into woo. I try to boil it down to biology because I'm a human biologist. All right. But this is about 6 feet 10 inches to 7 off the ground. And so what you're looking at here is above that. And I just want to say, a lot of the skeptics have said, well, this is a cow because there was cattle behind the tree line. There's no way this is a bovine. Thanks very much, Bob. In fact, if you allow me to dip into a bit of anthropology. Sorry, Tom. I kind of looked at the Gigantopithecus theory as an anthropology student, in 1968, when I was studying zoology and anthropology. That didn't seem to hold because they seemed too human, even without listening to what the natives were saying all along. These are not animals. These are wild beasts. These are people. They are a type of people, okay? So here's a people from China reconstructed by Dr. Grover Krantz, but this is a 2/3 size reconstruction. This is not the actual size of Java mat. This is Meganthropus, Homo erectus. We know that the DNA of Sasquatches, Dr. Ketchum has spoken with me on the phone. I sent hair from British Columbia, from Seashell, BC, into that project. We know that they contain human mitochondrial DNA. How many of you know which side of the family human mitochondrial DNA comes from? The mother, always the mother's mother. And yet there's other DNA in there that we can't identify. We don't know what it is. We just know that it's alien and that it could be archaic hominid. Okay, I'll shut up right now.
No, you're fine. My arm.
Okay, so
My arm. My arm.
Yeah.
No, but go ahead, please continue.
Well, I like to hear stories that you people have.
We will have plenty of time for stories.
I can add, just to finish up on Bob.
Yeah.
What my wife and I encountered is still questionable, but the Wenatchee World newspaper, May 18th, 1987, had it on the front of the local edition. What I loved about the article, at the end of the article, it said for many years there had been sightings in the same area. How many in this room have seen Harry and the Hendersons? How many of you are aware that on Highway 2, Index Espresso is a film location for that movie? Don Amici sold the little lamp with the Bigfoot from that little museum. It's still up there. Mark and Sandy are the owners of that location. They've got Bigfoot paraphernalia. They even sell Bigfoot souvenirs. I stopped in there with my wife, Sandy, and we introduced ourselves. And Mark went on to tell me after my sighting that he had had a sighting in the snow at Trinity Ridge, just 4 miles north of where we were, with his dog. So that was a real wonderful opportunity to understand that Bigfoot's not seasonal. It's year round. So even when you're out there snowshoeing, which I've done many ski groups and made them all aware when we're up in the Cascades, watch for prints, get your nose sniffing, listen. So there you go. So if you're on Highway 2, stop in and say hi to Mark and Sandy and support Harry and the Hinders. There's still a hood mask up there from the movie, by the way.
So as we continue on here, as we all know, we are in Sasquatch backyard. I mean, this is a great place to be. I will recall about a year and some change ago, we decided we were going to go and do I would say a drive to go see the sunset near Mount Rainier. So we drove out to Greenwater. We took 410. We took off the exit. We started heading up the mountain. We hit the Forest Service Road, and we continued about 3 to 4 miles. And I'm like, God, where are we going? And as we continued to get through the gates were all open. You know, this is summertime, so the gates are open. There are people that are camping down on the lower part of the river. And what's interesting to me as someone who's worked in broadcast for 20 years and has gone on these Forest Service roads, this was the first time I ever had the unique opportunity, and I only know this because of having these interviews, that when you're driving up there, you're typically in an area where there's no cell service. And as we're continuing to drive, we're like getting up the road, and all of a sudden the road starts to get a little bit thinner, but all of a sudden now there are branches in the road, aligned. I'm like, well, that's odd. I'm like, I've never seen this before. Very strange to see. But it wasn't like they were just like they fell from a windstorm or anything. They were placed there strategically, one after another. It's like, okay, we'll just go over them. Just went over the logs, little branches. And then I saw the pile of rocks stacked. And that's when I was like, all right, I'm out. There's somebody else up here besides us. And I know that people else have their encounters, but to me, that was enough to say, you know what? I need to be up here with a guide. And that's the opportunity that I know that Tom and I've talked about before of, we need to get a group together. And I know we've talked about this in the shows and previous shows that we've had with you on about going out and do night, surveillance at night and going out and doing research and work at night. Tom, can you share your experiences out here in the Muckleshoot tribe? I mean, we're in the Muckleshoot Nation, so share those stories that you've shared with me before.
Well, when I first came down here, moved down here, it took me about 4 or 5 years to really get acclimatized to living in Kent, Washington for longer than 3 weeks. I remember days I'd look out the window and Peggy go home, go back to your bush, come back, I'll be here. So I did. So anyway, we got invited to the Muckleshoot Amphitheater of all places, and they brought us down the hill behind the amphitheater where all the native tribe members dumped their fish carcasses and bones and hides, no plastic or glass, which I was really impressed with. But it's a dumping ground. And we went down the pyroclastic flow, I guess, cliff on a road, and we set up and they shared with us the stories of their encounters down there investigating. And I kind of thought, I think these guys are pulling my leg. We're right here at the urban environment. But then it taught me something, what I call transition zones, going from where they sleep down to where they harvest their human-produced proteins. So when we investigated further along that river, we found places where farmers were dumping all kinds of stuff over the pyroclastic cliff down into the river bottoms. And then one day we found a road down there just over here a bit. And now I see that it's a transition zone. Those Sasquatches coming down the river, going down not all the way to the amphitheater, but to the areas where the other transition zone, the creeks and everything, go up into the farm areas. So this is why I think it's a real hot spot. And we know Green River is up the canyon. And a lot of people say, well, they're migrating up there. And I'm like, why would they? They're Indians. We're lazy. We got short legs. We don't want to walk all that way. The rocks are slippery. There's snow on the ground. So they're staying down here. So in the area around here, investigating, I drove over another bridge today that I was like, I got to come back here and go under that bridge. They're natural caves and shelters for or artificial caves and shelters for Sasquatches, man-made. Abandoned farms and buildings, take a look at them. And down in the river bottoms, you know, I know this is a hot spot, you know, and it's, you know, it's, you just got to be able to think like a Sasquatch. So go to sleep at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, wake up around 8 and 9 o'clock at night, have something to eat, go out there and be out there and watch like I do over here across the Buckley Bridge, take that right towards Pinnacle Mountain. And the first big farm you come to just below there, park your vehicle at night and watch the humans. Watch them turn their porch lights off, their first floor living room lights and TV. And as soon as those bedroom lights and TVs go off, roll down the windows and listen. You will hear the chatters, the claps, as the Sasquatches are coming down to feed on the human-produced foods. And it's amazing that what I've learned with Sasquatch is I've spent decades out there in the bush. My knees are bad, and I wish I could get up the Alpines again like I used to, but I think those days are over unless I use a vehicle or a helicopter. So I can't get up to the Alpines in the summer where they are during June through until when the salmon come to our streams in the Pacific Northwest. But now I've learned, got to think like a Sasquatch, got to go to the compost bins, go to the areas where they're going after compost bins, fruits and vegetables in the backyard gardens. You know, you dig up a potato patch in January, like right now, you're going to find potatoes. There's some leftovers. Then we have our pet foods that are out there, our livestock, our chickens and every other feed in the back shed. And who goes to their back shed to check on the chicken feed or the horse feed between 11:45 at night and 4 in the morning? Sasquatch does, not you. You're busy farting and REM sleeping up in your bedroom. Sasquatches have good ears. All they got to do is come to your house and listen. Oh, farting and snoring. Let's go hit the human-produced proteins. So that's what I look at now. It's a lot easier. Plus, I always got a flush toilet around. So if I need to go to a gas station, get a coffee and a toilet, I got it. So this is one of my best areas to investigate. But it's all the way up to the Canadian border and throughout Vancouver Island and everywhere else. Urbanized Sasquatch. And that's what I'm starting to learn are a lot easier to look for. And besides that, like we did at the Buckley Bridge with the FLIR, you know, you can buy FLIRs now for under $1,000. Click to your cell phone, FLIR Scout 2s, and then all the knockoff brands that are even cheaper. They work. And that's when you're going to get them. Yeah, if you go out in the daytime, well, we have someone that works with the group from the Olympic Peninsula here today, but the Olympic Peninsula, the Olympic Project has taught me where Sasquatches go in the daytime. They go to a place that's a pinnacle on top of a mountain or a hill. So they have 360-degree visual, hearing, smell. And when the scouts go, boom, that clan group can wake up and they got 360 degrees exit to get away from the stinky humans. So that's what you got to look at. So if you're going to see one in the daytime, you better be like Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. You better be around the bubbling river or creek so they don't hear you. And always do this. Finger up in the air. Find out what the windage is. Never, ever Sasquatch investigate without walking into that wind because they're doing the same thing to you. And if you hear that bang, tree knock, that's Morse code. That could go who knows how far to the clan unit. And the clan unit is like an atom. You have the nucleus, you have the protons and electrons, which are scouts, harvesters, and hunters. And when that unit has to move, it will move in the direction that the scouts tell them to. So it's their military, how they work in the bush. You know, when we used to come across them, we knew. And sometimes my partner out in the bush, my cousin would say, let's go put the jig on them. Let's trick them. And we'd be crawling using the windage. And most times we never did get close to them. You'd always hear that bang, Morse code going through. Even in Omaha, I noticed that. So there's a lot of things that you got to look at that I look to humans and I see them on TV. And Peggy remembers the day I wanted to throw my beer bottle at the TV screen. I threw Meldrum's book almost across the bedroom one night because of the stuff that's in there. They're speculating. They're bumbling and stumbling. Go to your Indians. talk to them, go to your bushers, the people that live and work in the bush, the forest timber cruisers, not so much the loggers, because remember, Sasquatches hate loggers. Once the loggers come in with their survey tape, the next thing you know, their home is torn down and trees are dropped and roads are put in and blasting takes place, and that clan unit will move away from the logging slash until it gets really thick again. So you got to think like that. Think like a Sasquatch. And I guarantee you, you're going to better your chances of seeing them. And neutralize your smell. Buy a new pair of clothes. Wash them in water without soap a few times, and then put them in a bag with spruce boughs or cedar boughs, and then keep changing them, and then eventually leave that bag closed until you go investigate. And no deodorant, no colognes, no nothing. Go and neutralize yourself, and I guarantee you, you're going to get close to them.
Neutralize, not neutered, right?
Well, I mean,
Everything Tom says is absolutely right on. I've hunted in Alaska too. Get rid of the clothes. Just some hunters just even
wait, you're going naked then?
Especially, yeah, go naked. It doesn't get that hot in Alaska.
Yeah, I was going to say. I know you have some. I know you had. I tongue in cheek joking around here. I was joking at the beginning about you ripping pages out here. I was like, if you have a nervous twitch, I can give you a stress ball. I have one in the car, but I know you want to share some of your stuff that you have here that may. We'll get to that real quick, but a question for you guys. We all know that, I mean, how many of you were alive during the Mount St. Helens eruption? Yeah. Okay, so the legendary story of allegedly during this volcano eruption, they were picking up carcasses of animals, the dead livestock that were there. Now, there were two guys that came in that were from the Air Force. My understanding was from the Air Force. They came in and they were to watch. They gave these two guys guns. They're like, you need to watch this. They're like, why? These things are dead, right? Well, in the pile, allegedly, were dead Sasquatch from the Mount St. Helens eruption. Do you guys have any insight on that story? Do you want to start, Bob?
I have transported a lot of military out of JBLM, all different services. And where I heard the story from, can't give away the source, but very, very strong source. And for what it's worth, I would share literally the outline that you just gave. And I would get affirmations from those on my bus. No words, no verbiage, just mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to go kind of in the same direction. I have a sighting, which was really unique, told to me from a manager that was on my freight dock at Consolidated Freightways back in the 90s. And 3 or 4 Teamsters came up to me finding out that I had this encounter over at Lake Wenatchee. And this manager went on to tell me that he had a friend of his in his car. They were coming down from Bellingham on I-5 by Lake Samish. My wife and I were just up there last week. There's a point in the I-5 area that the trees are in the middle, in the median there, with the view of the lake. In broad daylight, as you're saying, they're normally not seen in daylight, but this creature was on the shoulder, right shoulder. And this friend of my manager's was a Washington State trooper. And they saw this creature standing on the shoulder. As they passed by, James, my manager, said he looked in the rearview mirror and saw this creature take 3 strides over those 2 southbound lanes. Those lanes are pretty wide, but not wide enough for my gait to do 3 stride. It disappeared in the trees in the median. He looked at the trooper and said, you just see what I saw? And the trooper said, keep driving. So I'm just attesting. You're going to see things all around the clock. More at night opportunity, I agree. But we have this climate with the government that we should not know too much or be questioning things around us. And my point is, I'm out here to learn as much as I can while I'm still on this earth. And I love your promotion of the Native American tribe. I'm a follower of Yellowstone, 1923, 1883, and I am learning so much from Taylor Sheridan. How many of you knew, as case in point, in the show 1883, when Elsa is on a horse and she volunteers to go watch the herd at night, and she's being told to watch for the sparks under the horse. I never knew in my 62 years that horses spark when those horseshoes hit the rocks on the ground. And they did show on camera that actually happens. So I'm still learning at age 62. But my point is, yeah, the military, they do have a border, let's say, of knowledge, and not to go past the threshold of sharing that with Joe Public or Jane Public. For our Christian-based world, it would throw pandemonium around the world to know there's other things out there that don't necessarily get told to us. So keep your minds open. That's all I can say. We exist. By the way, I'll take a short commercial break. Here's size 15 right here. So Bigfoot's a legend right here. Thank you, Nordstrom, for providing size 15 shoes. And I've seen 18s bought in the same lane in front of me.
Guys, anything to add to that? Yeah, go ahead.
So who here knows of the Laluska Foundation, Ariel Cougar, Washington? Any of you guys been brought there as kids? So anyway, it's Indian museum and dance performance place up there. Well, that's my family's Gildas, our box of treasure of crests and songs and everything. But the family we adopted, Chief Laluska and his family back in 1971, set up that foundation and that performance for the school kids in the Pacific Northwest. Well, then just before the mountain was popped its cork, the father was sitting on the porch and others, and they were hearing the Sasquatches vocalizing down there. And they could hear them running up the hill one night, chattering and yelling. And within a week, it was silent, and the Mount St. Helens popped its cork. When you study the anthropological and indigenous people's history from this area, there's stories about them looking up at Tahoma, Mount Rainier, and saying, we better get in our canoes and go up. We have stories on Vancouver Island and up by Vancouver of the people down here coming en masse to the north to get away from that mountain when she popped its cork thousands of years ago. So I give benefit of the doubt. Yeah, there probably was the odd stupid Sasquatch that got hit and killed there. But I think the majority of the clans had migrated further north, east, and so forth. They knew what was going to happen. You know, animals are smart. Look at your doggy and cat when they start acting up. All of a sudden, within 5 minutes, there's a big earthquake. So I give benefit of the doubt to the Sasquatches that, they got out of the territory before Mount St. Helens. But on to the military part, yeah, I've been chased by the men in blue up in Canada. You guys call them the men in black down here. I've been droned. I've been even sitting on a BC ferry going from the mainland to Vancouver Island after talking on cell phones, messenger, texting, emailing to Buddy that I'm going to meet him on his motorhome with his wife at the ferry terminal coming up from Seattle area. And I'm going to go to Vancouver Island with them, and we're going to go on a yacht, and we're going to go investigating Sasquatch. We're sitting on that ferry, and someone said, hey, look, and you see a drone come out and go along the ferry till it got to the window where me and the two other Indians were sitting. And that drone come right up to us, looked at us, and then bolted away. So we've been out in Anchor, and Peggy's been there with us where we've seen lights, we've seen things. So yeah, the government doesn't want us to find conclusive proof of the existence of Sasquatch. Why not? Well, the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs is a multi-hundreds of $1 organization, if not over $1 billion per year, to look after the Indians in the U.S. Canada, everything you see on me other than my clothing is free. Dental work, intelligence from from education to my glasses. We get everything covered for us up there. And, so they don't want a fourth or third Indian tribe identified called Sasquatch because we're all from Washington State. We know what the marble murrelet and the spotted owl caused us. A lot of people financially were hurt because those environmentalists got their way with their BS, and millions of hectares of forest land was taken off the logging and other blocks. Well, now here we are 40 years later, and we find out those NGOs are full of BS. They were lying to us. The spotted owl and the marbled murrelet are not endangered or going to be in threat of extinction. They simply adapted to go put their nests in second and third growth forests. So now we look at Sasquatch, and now we know why they don't want them discovered. Because once they are, trust me, we're going to see more gates in our backyards. We're going to see logging companies go belly up. We're going to see all kinds of things happening when the exclusive proof of Sasquatch is identified. But back when Chaz started and the people were acting up in downtown Seattle, my favorite corned beef restaurant was behind the blockades. I couldn't get to it. So the next morning I woke up with a hangover, and that's when I created that design. Sasquatch Lives Matter.
On that note, I know we're getting close to open up for Q&A. We're going to transition. So what'll happen is we'll do our paranormal story of the week from 4:30 to 5. We'll take one of these microphones and we'll allow you to come up and share your encounter, and we'll do a Q&A. If you have a question that you want, we'll take one of the mics and open it up and let you come up. Before we start our Q&A, guys, what's the biggest misconception that everyone has? I know that when we talk about Sasquatch, some people think it's indigenous to the planet. There's other researchers out there that think it's not from here. It's transdimensional. It may be a UFO. Can you give us some insight on that? You want to?
This is the question nobody wants to answer.
Yeah, this is the ugly question, right?
I can butt in here real quick. Some of the sightings that have been given to me have been alien oriented. And as a case in point, a young woman and her son coming down from Omak on Highway 97 in broad daylight, see the creature cross the point of the road. Once the car makes that point of the road where the crossing is, the son and the mom look out to the field and they see a straight line, no body defined whatsoever. And I have had probably 30% of the people report sightings to me that have some inkling of alien connection. So I'm open in the sense that it could be tied in with aliens because of intellect. These creatures certainly know their presence and what's around them. But the other aspect is I call them a North American ape. They argue that they came from Himalayas, from the abominable snowman, came across the polar crossing. I don't really try and say specifically what it is, but consider it a primate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're hominids like we are. They have human DNA. That's my perspective on what I found using DNA samples from hair that I got in BC near Seashelt from the landfill. I do forensic art, so if any of you had a sighting and you'd like me to do a sketch, start working on a sketch, on a series of sketches, because it usually takes 10 evolutions to get it right, I'd be happy to do that for you. Please come and see me. I've got a number of sketches here that took me a while to do. Sometimes it takes days, repeated going over from Alaska and BC. My own personal sighting illustration sketches in that book. You're welcome to look at it if you like. I'm fascinated by their strength. The upside down trees. Anybody familiar with those trees in Alaska? I worked with Al Jackson. That was us on Monsters and Mysteries of Alaska. We went up to where the Clinkets closed the road at the last minute. They changed their mind about letting our film crew go up. I was just one of the people that they filmed. I knew about the trees. The natives said, those big black gorillas that live up there, and I don't think of them as gorillas. I think some of the natives describe them that way. You mark their territories by putting the trees into the soft muskeg. It's not really that hard to do, but you couldn't do 3 straight, with a logging, with a guy logged. I've logged. I would agree with Tom. They don't like to hear the chainsaws. They hate anything that sounds like a chainsaw. If you got a quad up the mountain, they'll chase you right off. But I do have these illustrations, and everything I saw in Alaska, I didn't see the face of the Alaskan Sasquatch that ran across the road. That is not in my book, but I did do a sketch of that, and they looked alike. The American and the Canadian, you couldn't tell them apart. And I didn't didn't get any conversation out of either one of them, although I have heard vocalizations. Without any racial prejudice, can I just make a sound? Can I just try to reproduce what I heard one night in the old growth? Okay. I'll do it without the mic. This is for about a minute during salmon season in Alaska in 1997 at 1 a.m. in old growth. Okay, about like that. It went on for about a minute, and it faded off with this. Middle of the night. I mean, There's no varied thrushes. There's no hermit thrushes. You know what I'm saying? There's no night birds. I knew all the owls. There's nothing like that. And that kind of chatter. I'm no Ron Moorhead. I didn't, get any tape recorder or Sierra sounds like that. But that's what I heard. And when I've studied linguistics, it almost sounded Asian. And I've heard that from other people too. About 5 or 6 other people who've described this chatter have told me it sounded to them like an Asian language, which if you talk to Igor Burtsev, our Russian colleague who researches Chuchinas, Marigdis, Yagmorts across Siberia, as well as Almastis, and he's alive and well, Igor, some great books. The native stories from the Chukchi describe something that was just like a Sasquatch. So Siberian Sasquatches I still am doing research in Russia. So, I mean, at arm's length, I'm not going there. I use Ukrainian friends to help me do that. Yeah. So I guess we're going to open it up. Oh, by the one more thing. The natives in Alaska in the Athabascan areas are afraid of these, but they respect them and sometimes feel sorry for them. But they don't leave gifts or anything like that. I know that there's been wars between First Nations and tribal groups and Sasquatches. Call it war after somebody gets shot or hurt and responds with violence. It just really goes downhill pretty badly, pretty quickly.
We need you on the mic so that.
Sorry. So you don't want to carry a gun. You don't want to
Thank
be
you.
packing a gun out there unless it's for your own personal protection.
You go ahead.
So me, I've never seen a Sasquatch climb into a UFO or come out of one. I've never seen one cloak. I've never seen one jump through a porthole. I've never had one read my mind. I've seen an orb in an Indian burial ground, and that orb turned into a woman holding a lantern. So to me, whenever I hear orbs, I think of Lolilo, the ghost. So as far as Sasquatch, I've seen their poops, I've seen their pee, I've seen their footprints, I've seen them harvesting, I've seen their kills. I've seen them throw things at me. I've heard things bounce. I've had them bluff charge me. I've had them look at me in a spotlight of a fish boat, and many other times. And all I can say is I saw a big, hairy human, and it had no supernatural or magical powers. But out of respect, if people come to me, I always tell them I'm part of Monster X Radio. We are Bigfoot without the BS. So please, no woo-woo. I'm not going to discuss it. I don't want to hear it. And as far as my beliefs, they're just critters and chatter like a Sasquatch, like Ali Robert said. Yeah, they can sound Chinese at times. And I think it's the elderly females that have that sort of what they call samurai chatter. The males are like us Indians. We speak like chieftains. We speak because I belong to the Hamatsa Society, where this is one of the rare occasions I use a microphone. I usually stand and talk with a booming voice, because that's what we Kwakwaka'wakw males are taught to speak like. And that goes for Sasquatch. When they want to say something, they're and you'll hear that chest pound. They say what they mean and they mean what they say, and they emphasize the point. And if you don't take the hint to turn and walk away, because when you hear a tree knock or a bush being shook or a dead tree being pushed down, that's them telling you stop. Human, turn around, go back where you come from. Me and my family are here. And if you don't heed those warnings and you continue on, well, you can go on that cruise July 4th or September 4th to the 11th called the Alaska Bigfoot Cruise that Peggy and I will be performing on, along with Dr. Jeff Meldrum and David Pallades. Because if you don't heed Sasquatch's warning, you will be a steaming turd in the forest and be in the Missing 411 series.
Great point on that. Well, to add to that, does everybody remember the UW professor, the assistant professor that went up hiking at Mount Rainier? Does anybody remember this like 2 years ago? Yeah. Yes. Well, my guess is that he probably became food, is my guess, because the only thing they found was his canister. Go ahead.
There are a number of people who have followed Sasquatch interactions with people over the decades, and some of them have actually been very clearly beneficial to people. Now, I also want to say that not all Native groups have the same perspective. In fact, it's amazing in spite of how much commonality there is about Bigfoot and Sasquatches in native oral traditions across North America, and I've been to 45 states, and I've worked in them as a physical therapist with natives, and I've also been a physical therapist in Canada, working from Quebec right to the Yukon. And what I've found is there's some commonality. But here's an example of what you'll also hear. With all due respect, I have no doubt that Sasquatches have a flesh and blood existence, but you're also aware that there are some oral traditions and perceptions of Sasquatches as having a dimensionality that can be stepping in and out of our own vibrations, our own frequencies and resonances. And it goes quite simply like this. If you're in a native clinic anywhere in the United States, a public health service native clinic, you'll see a picture on the wall, most likely, not just of the president, but of a woman, Tlingit woman from Alaska named Margaret, the late Margaret Peradovich. Have any of you ever heard of her? All right, thank you. I had the honor of knowing her and also playing pipes at her memorial in Klawock, Alaska, some years ago, and also of knowing 3 of her granddaughters, who are all Tlingits. And at some point, Nina and Kathy Yates and Brenda Leask, Brenda was on Finding Bigfoot, talking about say a prayer, be respectful. Okay, I don't know if you ever remember that from Prince of Wales Island. Grandma, Auntie, they would all call her Auntie, are Sasquatches and Kushtakas, that shape-shifting Tlingit, being the same? And Mrs. Peradovich answered, each in their own time and place, all 3 grandkids, yes and no. And they all got amazed by that answer and asked her, Grandma, how can that be? And Mrs. Peradovich, Margaret Peradovich's answer was, well, a Sasquatch is a Sasquatch, but a Kushtaka, that means otter man, can be anything it wants. All right. So I'm just stating that there are different ethnic perceptions on this. And it doesn't take away from the flesh and blood aspects of Sasquatches. In fact, I think the more we look at it, the more we'll find that there are different types, strokes, types, and flavors. It's like the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm interested in hearing your stories too as we go on. Thank you, Mario.
Yeah. Well, I guess I better turn my mic back on. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to transition to our paranormal story of the week, and then we are going to open up one of the microphones. So if you have a story or an encounter that you'd like to share with our panelists, we're going to do that right now. But let's first get to our paranormal story of the week.
You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana. Call or text the Phenom hotline, 775-990-5151.
For the paranormal story this week, I thought I'd see if I could find something here around Bonnie Lake. A strange scenario involving an Air Force aircraft and crew that's still talked about to this very day. It was in April of 1959. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-6, at least that's what we refer to as this cargo plane nowadays, based out of McChord Air Force Base, that is McChord Field at the time. April of that year, it was just doing some maneuvers around Bonnie Lake, known as takeoffs and landings. We call it touch and go practice. Season crew had pilot First Lieutenant Robert Ray Dimmick. Co-pilot that day was Thomas E. Lasater. And flight engineers, Technical Sergeant Guy Cunningham and Staff Sergeant Arthur Footy. It was during one of the landing runs, the plane was told to hold and let some approaching fighter jets land. So the aircraft put into a hold pattern, basically just fly around in space, keep it safe, keep away from everybody. And it was during this holding pattern that the pilot had done many times before that allegedly there came a panicked radio call that said, "We've hit something," or "something has hit us." The plane quickly lost altitude as the pilot struggled to maintain control, finally clipping some treetops in the surrounding wilderness around Bonnie Lake, which heavily damaged the wing. The plane would then continue limping on, spewing flames, would come down just outside the town of Ording, killing everybody on board. The official explanation, the crash due to pilot error and a misunderstanding between the pilot and ground control, all compounded by the fact that it was very dark and there were no ground lights in the wilderness they were flying over at the time. For the Air Force, it was just a tragic accident. Some odd details would begin to emerge that seemed to point to something stranger. In the days after that crash, in April of '59, some locals claimed they had heard some sonic booms, and there was reports of strange lights in the sky in the weeks before and even on the evening in question. When combined with the claim that the pilot had said they had hit something, this started to spawn rumors that maybe it collided with a UFO. Now, according to some researchers, the plane also did seemed to hit the ground at an angle. It's been claimed that it seemed to have almost come down vertically as it was pushed down from above by something. Also, according to some witnesses, there were sinister efforts by the military to quiet local officials in the town of Orting from talking about it. In fact, 2 whole pages were retracted from the original report, and numerous requests for that information have allegedly been denied time and time again. And why should that be if this was a simple training accident involving pilot and ground tower error? They were flying in calm conditions on that routine run and suddenly radioed a collision before going down, taking the lives all on board. Over the years, the oddities and discrepancies have made sure that the case has still generated discussion in some circle and will go on as probably never really solved. I'm Mark Christopher. There's your paranormal story of the week.
Thank you, Mark. That is our normal paranormal story of the week. Again, if you have not ever listened to the show, you can listen to it. So everyone is okay. So here's what we're gonna do. We're opening up the round table now. So if you have a Sasquatch encounter or a question or Q&A, what we're gonna do is take the microphone over here and just take it out of the holster there. Just pull it out. Just pull out there, and then come on up if you have an encounter. If not, we will go back to roundtable, and then what we'll do is we'll close everything out, and then we will also, the text line is open, 775-990-5151. So if you're watching the stream online, you can call us now. The U.S. Phenomenon hotline is open. We're going to give these guys an opportunity this evening around, as soon as we wrap things up, we have T-shirts to buy, hats, books. We got it all. So here's what we're going to do. I know there's some people out here that are firm believers and have said they've seen. We'd like for you to come up. We have a microphone here. If you'd like to share your encounter, please do so. We want to hear about it. This is an open forum, and this is why we're all here. No one's here to judge anybody. Looks like Bob. Bob, do you have okay, here we go. Go ahead and talk. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, all right. March 2019, we lived in Bonnie Lake at the time, and I was headed to a job in Issaquah. So if anybody knows where the old cannery is, and that little S curve that goes around the West Valley Highway, it was rainy, foggy that morning. I come around that S curve, and about this big, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all black, across the road. I stopped and went, what the was that? I see, just like that.
I was like, oh.
I stopped my truck, I got out, I walked, and I turned around, and I went back to where I saw it, and I tried 5 steps. It took me almost 10 to get across there. I don't know, I mean, but it's still, to this day, I got goosebumps. You can't see them, but that's what I saw, and my first time even learning about Bigfoot was 1974 when I heard about Momo, the Missouri Monster. I was 10 years old. I was hooked since then, and I've been a believer since then, and I always will be. Bigfoot
Thank
exists.
you. Everybody, please make some noise.
Hey, Van, what I want to point out, you show the same characteristics as each and every one of my people. They have the same reaction as if it was just yesterday. And applaud you for coming up and telling us that. Yeah, you saw what you saw.
So if you're watching online and you want to call us and you have an experience, the text line or the phone number is 775-990-5151. We do have people that are watching online, so they are huge Sasquatch fans. They're like, let's go Bigfoot. So again, for those who are sharing their stories, I mean, it takes a lot of courage, because this is why we open the forum to say, look, this is a closed forum. Everyone here has either had an experience, looking for an experience, or wants to share an experience. And like our panelists up here who have had the opportunity to hear stories like Bob and Tom and Robert here, who have done so much research and have been out in the bush or out in the woods and research after research and hike after hike and blood, sweat, and tears, these things aren't just, I mean, they're so smart from just listening to your guys' stories. Now, do you guys feel that, I want to go back since we're waiting for someone else to come out to share. The guy that went lost, I forget the professor. What's interesting to me is like, even from his family, because I've done a lot of research and I keep telling, what's his name? Missing 411. I'm like, you got to do this. You got to do this case. You got to do this case. Because when allegedly, he was an experienced hiker. He had the equipment. Now, Tom, I know that you and I have gone back round, and I know this, we talked about this in like years ago. If he was such an experienced hiker, how is it that he's gone? The only thing is found was his water bottle. None of his gear was found. All of it's gone. I mean, what can we say to that?
Well, down in the Omaha Indian Reservation, where I was taught that Sitonga, their Sasquatch, from a medicine woman and gentleman who actually, Lucas White, who was sort of looked after by Sasquatch as a young boy when he had to run away from the town and the police and the social services when he was 12 years old there for a period. But anyway, they taught me Sitonga, their Sasquatch, have laws, very strict laws. Lucas, we brought out here to the coast, and we went investigating with him up in the Cascades, and we sent him home, Peggy and I, with a FLIR attachment to a cell phone and a parabolic listening device and a video, that cell phone to video record. And a week later, he phoned me and apologized. I'm sorry that it took me so long to videotape you a Sasquatch. He had gone and videotaped. It's blurry. It's the edge of a cornfield, but you can see a big brown hairy blob squatch running across the field. But they have laws, very strict laws. Lucas would find a bike with one missing training wheel about 1.5 miles off the road in the timber from the Indian Reserve. He would find a crib infant's toy that they spin and things squeak and all that 3 miles out in the middle of Timbuk flipping nowhere in the Omaha forest of the Indian Reserve. And what we're finding is this guy that he's talking about, that all they would find is a water bottle. So Sasquatches don't use, in most areas, will not take knives and axes from our backyards. So we know they're not stealing that. They have laws, very strict laws. They're not allowed to have metal. They don't use fire. They don't have clothing. They're the perfect human, where thousands of years ago during our evolutionary climb, they said, this is bad. Now, if we look at the gods must be crazy, 1980s show how an empty pop bottle disrupted a clan of bush people and turned their whole life upside down, where the father leader chief had to take it to the edge of the world and throw it back to the gods because it must have been crazy to give them an empty bottle. Well, that's like Sasquatch. They don't use fire. They're not like we are right now as a society, worrying about Putin and crazy little North Korean with their fingers above buttons. So Sasquatches live a clean existence compared to us. So when you hear this story of this guy going missing, what I attribute it to is Sasquatches are like my Hamatsa tribe, or Hamatsa society I belong to. Hamatsa translates in the Kwakwala dialect, meaning human flesh eaters. When you see us dancing in the potlatches and we're going like that and we go, ho! What we're saying is, feed me human flesh and blood. We Hamatsas were the secret service agents for our chieftains. We would take the arrows, the spears, the clubs, and we would kill and consume our enemies' flesh to prove a point. Don't mess around with my chief. Otherwise, we Hamatsas will take care of you. And we have a dance to this day that we dance, and I don't want to get into it too much because we're on radio, but the words and the posturing we do on the floor are very fierce because we are the ultimate warriors, the Hamatsas, human flesh eaters. Which brings up a good point. We hear of Indian stories calling the cannibals from the forest, cannibals from the mountains, the cannibal giants covered in hair. How come a grizzly bear or a wolf pack, a cougar, a black bear can eat a human and they're just a human killer? They're not called a cannibal. Why are Sasquatches, when they kill and go after humans and eat them, they're called cannibals? Because they are human. They're eating another human, just a smaller one, not so much covered in hair and with no nocturnal vision. That's who we are. So that hiker that went missing to tell me everything about how good he was in the bush. He wasn't that good. He heard something, saw something, and he was stupid. He didn't use his well-developed frontal lobes to go, maybe I should turn around and get the hell out of here. He went and got curious and got consumed. And a Sasquatch probably grabbed his backpack and his walking stick, that things they couldn't find. And just like Yellowstone, went to the train station and threw it over the bluff. That's what I think happened to that one and many others. Sasquatches are smart enough to know to clean up their kill. So they're not going to leave too much stuff out. And that's why when these missing kids go missing, like the one on Vancouver Island where they found his shoes neatly together and the pile of clothes folded up, but they never found the kid again. So Sasquatches are covering their tracks. And that's, I've never read a missing 411 book. Maybe I should listen to some podcasts. So everything I share with you is from my experience and my native tribe and other native tribes.
And I think that's what's unique about having Tom on as a panelist, because you go off of what you know. And that's, again, it's key because it's information that it's not influenced. It's what you know and what you have to share. So does anyone else have any stories that they would like to share this evening before we close this up?
Hey, all right.
All right.
Here I go. And real quick, Van, can I ask, was that the first time you shared that story with anybody? Yeah. You feel better now, don't you? Yeah. You're not alone.
All right. What's your name and where are you from?
David Sandana from Puyallup.
Welcome.
I wasn't ever a Bigfoot believer, and we hunted by Mount St. Helens for 25 years. We hunted on the mud flow side, and then I've been to the markers where the explosion boundary is at. So there's where the explosion stopped. A friend of mine a couple of years back, he was talking about hearing this tree knocking down in this little valley we were hunting, and he was like literally terrified to go down there. And this is a guy I've known my entire life, not scared of anything, especially not just a sound. He wasn't going to go down there and let a sound stop him from hunting an elk. So I called him a couple words and said, you're being a little sissy. Let's go down there. And he refused. Well, years later, I was hunting a different area without him. I did a lot of things you guys talked about tonight was exactly what we do hunting. We make sure our clothes are descented. We're checking the winds. We're making sure we're quiet. I did this exact same thing that day. I found a little spot where this road was overgrown with trees, so you couldn't go in there. I thought this looks like a good spot. So I parked my truck, got all my gear on, checked the wind first thing. It's blowing into my face. So it's like, this is pretty good. Got into the little tunnel of trees, and then it was very mossy and there was leaves on the ground. So I'm watching my steps and I'm looking down, take a couple steps, look up, just surveying my surrounding. The hillside was steep to the right and then uphill to my left. And then about a mile in, I took a step forward and I looked up, and the road swooped down to the right and made a turn and then hooked around the backside of the hill. Something at this point came up that hill and stood there. And I'm looking at this. It seemed like a long time, but it was only seconds. And I didn't know what it was. And I've hunted there 25 years before I had a driver's license. And this creature turned, arms above its head, jumped over to grab like a tree branch. And this hillside is not like a hill, like Bonnie Lake 410 Hill. If you go down here, it's steep like that on the side, straight down. So whatever it was jumping to grab, to hang on to something. So I reasoned in my head that I can vividly see it. But at that point, I knew what I had saw. But there's no chance I was going to get a camera out or a phone. I knew I'd seen a Bigfoot at that point. I did have a pistol in a holster, and I backed out of there with it in my hand all the way to the truck. And I've never been a Bigfoot believer. And I told Matt the same story. And I said, there's no way you're going to see it if you're noisy, if the wind's not right. There's all these little things. And so that's my story. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story. It takes courage to come up here to share your story because, look, I haven't had an encounter. I mean, other than what I thought was, could have been, maybe, or it could have just been somebody else yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, one of the things don't tree knock. So remember, the Sasquatch tree knocks and breaks branches. That sometimes they'll shake foliage and trees. They'll push a dead tree down, even a live one, small at you. But as soon as they bang or bang, 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 stop, human, turn around, go back where you come from. So finding Bigfoot, that's why it's called Never Finding Bigfoot. They never did find it because every episode they're bang, 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 bang. Stop, Sasquatch, turn around, go back where you came from. I don't want you here. That's why they never found him. So don't tree knock. Just trust me. I will never tree knock unless it's the end of the night. We haven't heard anything, and then last ditch effort, I'll try it. And we've only had one reply. The other one is when you're close to a Sasquatch, you always do this. Touch your nose hairs. The water on your fingers, the saliva, it makes your nose hairs pick up scent better. And that's why bears, wolves, cougars, all the canines, carnivores do that. And then when you get closer to the Sasquatch, do it again. You can really smell them. But you seen what I did, eh? Don't repeat the same fingers and stick it in your mouth.
Attaboy. Before we wrap things up, does anybody else have a story they'd like to share or an encounter or yes? Yes, if you have a question, please come up here so we got to have you come up. We got to have, everyone's got to be able to hear you. We got to be able to hear you.
Eric. So the catch can question, people here may not be aware there's a like Bermuda Triangle in Southeast Alaska. Any tie to Sasquatch in there?
I heard it was the Indians.
Yeah, there is a tie.
And the reason I asked the question, my grandfather went missing there in the early 60s. They never found him.
That's what I meant.
Sorry, you hear that?
On a hunting trip.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the ones there. From what Robert will say more because he's been up there more than I have.
I lived up there for 27 years.
From the people up there, they've told me that, yeah, you really got to watch for our bush people. They're really aggressive. And you look at the reports and how many people are missing in that triangle area. It's just overwhelming. It's just amazed me when I looked into it and I didn't delve that deep. Robert spent a lot of time. You can probably talk more about it. But we're seeing the same thing in other regions. Vancouver Island, for example, there's 28 missing humans. And most of them were on the roads hitchhiking or walking at night. We have the Highway of Tears from Prince Rupert to Prince George in British Columbia, where the native people are telling me most of their loved ones that are missing are from the Sasquatches up there, the mushroom pickers, hunters, girls that were hitchhiking and so forth. The police will tell you that we have, serial killer up there. The native people tell you different. And then you have the Nahanni Valley that's up in Yukon, Northwest Territories area of the headless people. And the list goes on. And, so you really got to watch it, and that's why it's good to talk to the native people. If all of a sudden you go to another state or province in Canada and I'm going to go Sasquatch investigating, you might want to talk to the local Indian tribe. They might tell you, you might not want to go in this area because that's what we're doing. And that's one of the things Sasquatch Island is just going to be starting to do here in the next month or two. We're going to start a code of ethics and conduct for chance encounters and Sasquatch investigators. And I'm going to be reaching out to everyone, native and non-native groups and tribes and Sasquatch organizations to get input on writing a document that we can all read and know. And one of the things I'd like to do in there is put all of the North American Indian tribes that are Sasquatch hotspots, their websites, their emails, their phone numbers, their resource officers and cultural department contacts, as well as the North American First Nation or Canadian First Nations, because we're at that point. This is building to be a monster business. I'm blown away walking into this Lost Woods brewery. It just amazes me. I'm going to be bringing probably van tours and investigators here to spread money to this business and this community because I investigate up here. I'm one of the first humans to do boat-based whale watching in Western North America back when I was 15 with a Zodiac. Then I would do boat grizzly bear tours. Then I would participate in the first fiberglass sea kayak paddle with the whales in Johnson Straits, Eastern Vancouver Island in 1981 when I was 16. Look at those three industries. They're monster, hundreds of millions of dollars brought into the world now. And mark my words, people used to call me crazy for chasing bears and whales with the Zodiac and other boats. Well, when they hear I'm chasing Sasquatch with paying clients, they don't call me crazy. They say I'm a visionary. Because mark my words, if Buckley, Enumclaw, and other communities take the Sasquatch and run with it as a regional draw or a component to their regional draw in tourism, you will see your campsites, your hotels, your restaurants, your breweries filled up with those people that live in the concrete all around us, wanting to come to the hot spot of the Pacific Northwest US for Sasquatch, Washington State. And you're right here at the gateway of Sasquatch homeland and bedrooms. And British Columbia, Vancouver Island, we did the first commercial 12-passenger aluminum tour boat at night with a $32,000 FLIR night vision built into it, Sasquatch tour. And I do Sasquatch investigations where I have had 6 clients in the last 5 years see Sasquatch with me. So yeah, they're out there. And mark my words, it will be the biggest tourist business in North America real quick. Because unlike whales and bears and birds and skiing and golfing, it's not seasonal. Sasquatches are there to be investigated with paying clients 12 months of the year. So when I'm dead and 6 feet under, you can always say, look at that tour bus go down the road. 52 paying passengers going on a Sasquatch expedition, going to the Lost Woods Brewery to have a beer and a burger. Because mark my words, Sasquatch industry is a monster. And by the way, I brought t-shirts and other things afterwards you can buy.
All right. I know that there's someone else that has who has a question. Please come up if you have a. No, you don't want to share the question?
No, wait. I think we still have a question that's not answered.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. And the gentleman asked, and I'm sorry about the loss. Oh, okay. So I can respond to that. I have no doubt that all over North American parts of the world, Sasquatches by any name, some Sasquatches, some types of Sasquatches even, I don't want to say good, bad, and ugly, there may be different types. I'm certain there are different types, but even if there aren't, there's a spectrum. You've got your good behaviors and your bad behaviors, have been responsible for the abduction of individuals, usually children, more often girls and boys. Sometimes women, usually young, and occasionally, but very rarely, men. And I've read pretty much all of the 411 reports that describe several thousand federal American missing person cases. And when I say federal, it's interesting that since the Eisenhower administration, there's been a huge increase in the number of missing people in federal parks and national forests. I'm not going to say what documents Eisenhower might have signed, or who he might have signed them with, and what the Joint Chiefs of Staff had to say about that. But I had a cousin who was a vice president of IBM, a physical chemist by the name of Dr. Ian Kroll. He was also on the NASA board. My cousin Ian, his PhD was How Fireflies Glow. You would love to have been in the room when my much older cousin sat me down and told me what is happening in the skies and the dimensions around us, not just places, but also what's in the forests. I'm not going to go into all that. I miss him, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart for doing what he did. I would think that David Pilates' books on Missing 411 will draw you to be suspicious of the coincidental nature of who has federal authority in the location of that missing person. It's almost, to me, too much of a coincidence that the local police don't have any authority when the state police step in, and then the feds step in right on top of that. Am I telling you basically that they're aliens who are responsible for a lot of these abductions? I'm going to say some other dimensional, some entity, something else is going on here. I'm not going to talk about poltergeists, although Timothy Renner and Joshua Kuchin have written very good books. One of them called Where the Footprints End. And if you know somebody who's had an incident where, damn it, excuse me, those tracks appeared in a snowy meadow without 100 yards of any other possible, doing a pole vault on a tree. Believe me, I'm a biologist. I try to look at biological explanations for everything. I put collars on wolves. I worked as a fish and game technician in Manitoba before I moved to Alberta and then BC. Did conservation and outdoor recreation, hunter safety and animal identification in BC. Got run over by a grizzly bear. Thank God it was just a 2-year-old. Not far. It was his grizzly bear. It was at Night Inlet. It was a Quack grizzly bear. Yeah. But anyway, I might have survived because I'm a little more red on the inside than the average guy. I think that we need to keep our minds open. Certainly, there is an Alaska Triangle. There were two physical therapists. I'm a physical therapist. Wouldn't surprise you to know that I was really concerned when Sharon Buis disappeared in Juneau. And the troopers told me that she virtually just lifted right off the trail. The dog couldn't follow. There was no indication of a bear or a human perp. It was as though something had reached out and just grabbed her and lifted her up. So I'm tempted to blame Sasquatches, but I can't do the connection on it. I do know that it's happened, but I also, if I meet you afterwards, I have an interesting story. I don't know if I've ever shared it with you, Tom, right from your neck of the woods. The date's from the 40s. And I think Telegraph Cove, he would have been Quack. Okay. And this relates to a Sasquatch abducting a girl and returning her 1 year later. Did I ever share that story with you? Okay. So yeah, I carry a 454 in Alaska. That's a big caliber handgun. I need 2 hands on it. I just use it in case I have a bear problem. More people get eaten by black bears than by grizzlies or brown bears or polar bears. I had a patient who in Edmonton one summer, he'd been in the helicopter. He was a pilot. And the doctor said, no, leave that holster under his bed. He gets PTSD if he doesn't have it. I said, what? Oh, you don't know the helicopter. He sheltered in the crash wreckage for 2 days while the polar bear tried to get try to tear the helicopter wreckage apart to get at him. Can you imagine his state of nerves by the time the RCMP got to him and picked him up? So I said, what do you got he says, first thing I do when I get out of here, I'm signing on with another helicopter company. I'm taking my 44 and I'm going to find that bear and I'm going to blow him all the kingdom come. So he wasn't a big font. You wouldn't find him in Winnipeg at the Assiniboine Park Zoo where they have the polar bear exhibit in a big plexiglass tube where you can walk underneath the swimming polar bears. You wouldn't find him there. I don't believe I only knocked on a tree once. I'm not knocking anymore. I've only seen 2 Sasquatches. They were as flesh and blood as anything that Tom and I have run into. Didn't have a camera. One was throwing pebbles on my tent. It's in the book. You can read about it. I think it was after my girlfriend. And I can tell you they don't like bright lights. And they don't like motion sensors and they don't like infrared. And they don't generally like dogs. But these are all things that we could go into. I'd love to hear your stories. I'm here to hear yours.
All right. So if anybody has a question for our panelists before we wrap things up here, I think we have someone who Q&A. So this is it. We're going to do a last round of Q&A. If you have a question that you'd like to ask the panelists, feel free to raise your hand and you can even yell it from where you're at. Anybody? No, go ahead.
Yeah. Only one, and not from an Alaskan. He was a British Columbia guy, and he was talking about 2 inlets. He says, yeah, there's Sasquatches up these inlets, and it was right north of Kwakwakwa country, but south of Kitimat. And he was saying, we ran into things up there that, giant dog men. Oh, weird stuff. And that's all I know. He said, we're talking 12 to 15 feet. Now, all my Sasquatch, maybe 900 investigations in Alaska, and secondhand, maybe another 2,000 that I was able to look into, not investigate myself personally, but look into, listen to the person on the phone or get the letter. There is something. If you go to Juneau, and you go to the airport in Juneau and you go up to where those float planes are at the north end, just up by, used to be Immigration and Naturalization, where you could see aliens. They all said A and they had maple leaves on them. But she was the front desk gal and she's a very pretty Casca woman, about mid-30s. She'd be in her early 50s now. She's their front desk person from Fort Simpson, Fort Resolution, up on the BC, Yukon, Northwest Territories. Talking about Headless Valley, where Nahanni, where Sasquatches definitely seem to have a cannibalistic thing. And she said, my grandma, when she was a girl, said, oh yeah, there's like Bigfoot and Sasquatches, and some of them are big. How big? Well, the one that I saw tried to take the little girl in the village before the men came running out with their rifles, firing rifles to scare it and stop it, make it drop her. It was between 12 and 15 feet tall, she said. So, which is right out of the range of, forget Gigantopithecus. That was an ape. Okay. That was like a very closely related giant ancestor, giant relative of orangutans. Okay. It might've been upright on occasion. I don't know, but the jaws and the teeth, I think it might've been upright more than a modern orangutan would ever be. And this is more like what I think our DNA is talking about. But there was an 8 to 9 foot tall version of this in Java. And if you ask me, I think the biological part that we're used to looking at, flesh, blood, hair, DNA, what does a Sasquatch track, matches a lot of Asian, Siberian Sasquatches. And the last ice age would have pushed larger versions that were able to withstand the cold because they're bigger. Bigger guys can handle that cold, got more of their circulating radiator fluid inside as opposed to skinny guys like me getting cold on the outside, right? Would also explain if you're fighting over Ice Age Pleistocene giant elk, you're a Sasquatch, you got a Sasquatch wife, you got a Sasquatch kid, and you got a wolf pack there, big Ice Age wolves, and that giant elk is down. And the wolf pack says, hey, this is ours. And Alpha Sasquatch, big Chichenah male says, I got a wife and kid to feed and I need to be home by 5, So it'd be life and death. It'd be, would Sasquatches and wolves be life and death to the death enemies? Yeah. And do dogs have any wolf genes? Could it be that the reason Sasquatches don't like dogs is because, so.
Anybody else have a question out here tonight before we wrap things up for Dave?
The trees that upside down are kind of all over the place. I thought it was just a one-shot deal up in Alaska, and the muskeg was soft enough. It was about 20 feet from the road. Now, I've logged and I work with logging equipment. I thought a logger's done this. But the natives say they've all seen photographs of those trees before that logging road went in, when nobody went up there except to hunt blacktail. All right. And I believe them. I talked to enough, women who said, my husband's Army ex-war, they're up there with the buddies and there's the trees and there was no logging road up there. So it matched what I found where loggers had tried to yank those trees out of the ground, and you could see where the jaws, on the cherry picker, the big shovel had gripped it, and they closed in on the wood, but they weren't able to lift it up. Yeah, that's my impression. Those trees were like this around. Those cedars are still up there. I try to find them on Google Earth, but we could walk up there. I don't think they'd stop us. I don't think the Clickets would stop us, but they do have the road water barged. They really didn't want the camera teams going up there. National Geographic almost got up there the year before we got up there. And at the very last minute, the whole town, Quack City Council, all the elders got together and said, no way, we don't want them, getting involved with their Kushtaka.
Tom from Sasquatch Island, go ahead.
So when you study the anthropological and historical accounts of the Muckleshoot and other tribes, you'll find that female birthing and menstrual blood is taboo to male hunters. So they made sure they went to their birthing areas, they had their menstrual huts, and they still do, even just down the road here. But anyway, it's bad juju. You don't want to be near it as a male hunter back in the day. So the Sasquatches are the same way. So when you start seeing tree structures, what it's for is that Sasquatch male to be walking, doing his thing, be it scouting, harvesting, or whatever he's doing. And all of a sudden he sees something because he's walking with the wind or edging the wind. And he sees a tree structure or an upside down pecker pole, I call them, with roots up sticking in the ground. It's for him to stop, lick his fingers, step the wind, and go, I can't go downwind on that female because of the blood. I got to go upwind, around, and continue on. So tree structures, when you look at the teepees and the lean-tos, some of them are for breaking the wind. They're not for breaking the snow, the rain, the cold. They're just trying to break that cold wind. And I've got numerous pictures of those. But the main thing is don't waste your time looking for glyphs, tree structures, upside down trees and things like that. And most of the stuff you see on the internet is from people with small penises and they need attention. Just don't waste your time, because if you're out there, once you start looking at the tree structures for what they are, you're going to find out most of them are blinds, jumping zones for Sasquatches. So think about a Sasquatch. How does a Sasquatch hunt? Well, we know they throw things. What we can do with a single shot 22 long rifle, a Sasquatch can do with a rock.
Can I share
So-
something real quick? Add it just for a
Wait.
second.
And then, so that being said, you know, you gotta not waste your time looking for tree structures. Buy your FLIRs, your good binoculars, and your parabolic listing devices. They're under $50. And Peggy and I and others, we buy P1000 Nikons with built-in telephoto lenses, because you're not going to sit there like Les Stroud and other egomaniacs on the television and internet going, look at me, I'm out here doing this and I can start my fire and this is what I think Sasquatch is. They got a small lens. They want you to see them looking all cute and bushy. You look at someone who's got a P1000 Nikon or a camera equivalent to that with that big lens that you can look at a crater on the moon with on a clear night. Well, that's someone who's seriously trying to find crispy video and still pictures of a Sasquatch, because being zero kill, that's how we're going to identify them to be there at conclusive proof. Good video, because once you get that Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey interaction with a Sasquatch, with what we call white man's magic, the cell phone, and you can see the tartar and the cracks and everything in their mouth and the wrinkles moving and the pupils going back and forth. How the hell is some skeptic going to argue that finally someone got a close interaction with Sasquatch and we got some pretty good images? That being said, when people say they're interacting with Sasquatches in their backyard, small penis syndrome, looking for attention. Where's the pictures? Because everyone in North America has a cell phone. So don't get your leg pulled and don't believe the bunk and bullshit out there. Use your frontal lobes. You will find Sasquatch if you start getting away with all that BS.
As we get close to wrapping things up, I'm gonna let our panelists summarize and give one last thing. But does anyone else have one last question, or does anyone have a question before we wrap things up here? Tom Sewid, Tom will have all the, that's all. What we're gonna do is, so when we wrap up the show here, you guys will be able to interact. You guys can come up, talk to everyone, get the information that you want. So, t-shirts, books, whatever you want to, stickers, everything's available here. You might be able to take someone home if you need to. Tell more stories behind a campfire, I'm sure. So, from our panelists, as we get close to wrapping things up from the Pacific Northwest here, let's start with Bob. I know that it's as we wrap things up here. What would you like to say as we wrap things up here tonight?
I've got a map up here, locations of these sightings, just to denote it's not one specific area in Washington State, from Republic all the way down the Columbia Gorge, all the way up to Bellingham. So literally this entire state is something to consider. It just, again, all I can say is amplify, use your senses, enjoy the scenery. I can't tell you how much my dash cam on my tour bus is captured on the road. By the way, if you want to find out how wilderness works, there's a great YouTube video. There's 2 YouTube videos I promote. Anybody heard of the big elk herd over there at Ryegrass? Currently over 6,000 head. They're winter feeding in an area that they shouldn't be, but the windmills of all things have attracted them. Go on YouTube and watch elk crossing near Ellensburg. You'll see a sample of the herd, over 700. This couple come around a curve, and great video. The other video I want to promote is Teenaway Trail Cam 07. If you want to get an idea of wildlife using the same trail, Teenaway Trail Cam 07 on YouTube, it's still out there. You won't believe the amount of wildlife they capture in one summer. And I'm talking from bears to elk. One cow elk at the very end comes up to the camera. They use some kind of a salt lick opposite the camera on a tree, but you're watching an interstate of wildlife from turkeys to mountain goats. It's incredible. So when you think there isn't anything out there, take a look at that as a glimpse of what really is out there. How many of you even look off the side of the road when you're driving? I go Blewett Pass and I watch people flying up that road, and I'm seeing elk and deer. They're buzzing like A to Z, and they don't really take in. Enjoy the view, everybody. And besides, an elk and a deer will do substantial damage to your vehicle too.
As we wrap things up, Tom, anything you want to say before we wrap things up here?
If you're on Facebook, Sasquatch Island on Facebook is a group, and that's the go-to manual how to get close to Sasquatch and learn a little bit more on them. SasquatchIsland.com is our website for email and posts a few other things. YouTube, Sasquatch Island is my channel where a lot of the videos are me out in bush and traveling on a commercial salmon seine boat through the British Columbia coast where most people will never get. And I'm telling you about the Sasquatch encounters and reports and my experiences from there. But Sasquatch Island, we're all standing on it. And I'm here to hopefully help someone get conclusive proof of their existence.
Robert, final words.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you, Tom, for mentioning menstrual blood. Okay, in my book, I omitted to include the fact that a year or two after, it was about a year after this encounter that I had while with my girlfriend camping in the middle of Vancouver Island. She was a traveling OT, I was a traveling PT. We got together, CTAC, and we just reminisced about, we'd gone out for a year, so we reminisced about how cool the camping was. I never let them know what I'd actually seen for a second in my flashlight until I finally told her. She bugging me. She said, was it an elk? Was it a bear? I said, it wasn't either. I just let you think. I said, any elk or bear making that much noise? So she said, well, you could have told me. What? And then she described a Squaxin Island sighting she'd had when she was an undergrad. And I said, let me ask you, Louise, one last question. Did you not have your period at that time on that trip? I remember. And she said, yeah, I was. And I often wondered if that's not why at 12:30, every 5 minutes, I got a pebble on the side of my tent.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap things up on the radio broadcast side, but we're going to continue to hang out here at Lost Woods Breweries. Everyone make some noise from the Pacific Northwest as we wrap things up here at Lost Woods Brewery. I'd like to thank our sponsor here at Lost Woods Brewery, as well as Hops and Drops, who is going to feed our panelists this evening. You can join them every Tuesday night for the first Tuesday for their local tap Tuesdays, $4 beers, and they'll feature which will be all day. Plus, they'll be doing prizes and giveaways from 5 to 8 p.m. All right, that wraps things up here from the Pacific Northwest at Lost Woods Brewery. Everyone, thank you so much for being a part of our panel. Make some noise as we wrap things up here. And thank you so much for all of our guests. Bob, spelled backwards, Tom Sewid from Sasquatch Island, Robert from Raincoast Sasquatch, and myself, Mario Magana. Remember to look up at the sky, because you never know what you might see. Good night.